have your attention, please? You've come to see his casket, but you're going to have a special treat because he's going to talk to you. Pedro Menendez, the Avila.
Well, I think all of you know where you are. You're at the Mission of Nombre de Dios. And you've just seen the landing recreated by us here. What I want to make sure that you understand is the import that that landing here in Florida, in this spot, had to the history of all of North America. How many of you have heard of Jamestown? Yes, of course. How many have heard of the Pilgrims? Exactly. The landing that you just witnessed recreated happened here 42 years before the first Englishman set foot at Jamestown. 55 years before the Pilgrims landed at Plymouth Rock. Now, everyone knows that the Pilgrims were looking for religious autonomy and the ability to practice their faith as they saw fit. But just over past that bridge, the Spanish landed here 446 years ago. And they had the first parish mass in what would become the oldest continuously occupied settlement in all of North America, St. Augustine. Now, is there anyone here that is not from St. Augustine? That's okay. For those of you that are, and for those of you that live nearby, one important thing to realize about the city that you live in is that we are not pretending to be the oldest. We really are. Many people overlook this. Those to the north will overlook this because Florida was not a part of one of the original 13 colonies. But one thing that cannot be denied is that whether or not we were English or Spanish, we were Christian. That mass and the continually occupied presence of Christians here in St. Augustine removes all doubt and all argument from anyone with regards to the import of this site and this place and this city, because it was the beginning of Christianity in North America in regards to a continuous and permanent sense, because it was from here that the wellspring of the missions flowed. For the next 200 years, it would be the missions that would make Florida what it was. Now, Pedro Menendez, yes, he brought soldiers, and there was a bit of war when the Spanish first arrived. But Pedro Menendez knew that it would require the strength of the faith that he held dear, and that was king, that would settle all of North America and the peoples that lived here for the greater glory of God and their country of Spain. Not war, not violence, but benevolence and the doctrine of the faith. That is a fact. And it was the mission system that was different than anything that the Spanish did here in North America compared to everything that happened in the North. I hope that I've given you some sense of the history. And if any of you are curious, I would implore you to use a modern term, to Google it, to find out what I'm talking about, to find out about the Spanish mission systems that were developed and that were the brainchild of Pedro Menendez, although he did not live to see it, but were developed exactly as he had envisioned, and were the system that the Spanish relied on to bring Florida, which at that point extended from the Rio Grande all the way to Chesapeake Bay, not just the peninsula that we lived on. Florida was a much larger area. But from king to adelantado to governors, Christian faith was an important part of what they saw as their mission in the New World. And if there's anything that I can convey to you, it will be that they were determined in that responsibility. In the last letter that Pedro Menendez ever wrote in his entire life, one of the last phrases that he wrote to his nephew was this: There is no desire in my heart greater than this, that I will be allowed to go back to Florida, and in my days there saving souls. Those were his words, and those were his wishes. Now, is there anyone here that has any questions about what they've seen, or any questions that they would ask of Pedro Menendez?
What is your mother's name?
Any brave soul? My mother's name was Ana Maria, and my father were married in Avilés. My father died when I was a young boy. I was the son of 20 brothers and sisters, and so when my father died, by the time it was all broken up, we all ended up poor. But each of us, forced to make our own way, did so. Some of my brothers became sailors. I became a sailor. Eventually, Pedro Menendez became Captain General of the Treasure Fleet. The Treasure Fleet was the most important fleet or group of ships doing any business in the entire world. Reason being, there was a great deal of silver and gold that was being brought out of Peru and Mexico, going back to Spain to fund government. It was 1/10 of the entire amount of income for the Spanish Empire. It was very important to keep this protected. And every year, that fleet with ships full of gold and silver would pass less than 60 miles off our very shores. That was one of the reasons it was important for St. Augustine to survive and for St. Augustine to be here. Because in some way, in no small way, it protected the fleet that passed by here to go to Spain. ¿A la otra? ¿Cuándo ustedes hablan español? Está bien. Well, this is Florida. We spoke Spanish here for 190 years. We've spoken English for a while. I suggest the rest of you learn. Spanish will start to be spoken here again.
Did you have children?
I did. My oldest was Ana. I had a second daughter, Maria, who joined the convent. I had a third daughter, Catalina. She was a bit of a free spirit, so to speak. We did not always agree. Then I had a son, Juan, who was close to me. He had been on several adventures with me in Europe. One of the adventures, we had to go across France disguised. Because if the French knew who we were, we would have been arrested. We made it all the way from Brussels to Spain, disguised as other people. But he was commander of the New Spain contingent in 1563. He was taking the last part of the fleet back to Spain, but he did it in August, against my wishes. And it cost him the fleet, it cost him his ship, and he disappeared somewhere along the coast of Florida, never to be found again, lost in the wilderness. When I arrived here in 1565, I did my very best to retrieve as many of the castaways as possible. In fact, we recovered more than 130, but among none of them was my son Juan. If that was not tragedy enough, my oldest daughter Ana, who was my most beloved. She married Don Pedro Menendez de Valdez. I know his name sounds very similar to mine. We came from a different city. In fact, we were related, fourth cousins. He married my oldest daughter, but unfortunately she would meet a tragic end. At that point, I had several options to try to create an heir so that all of my titles and holdings here in Florida would be passed on with succession. It did not work out the way that I wanted. In 1574, I was made Captain General of the Fleet of Flanders, the Flanders Armada, which was to go against rebellion in Flanders and to stop the tide and flow of support to those rebels from England. But I, with my sailors, contracted typhus, became ill, and died 8 days later. I know, I got better. But
And how old were you?
at that point, I was 55 years of age. When I came here, I was 47. When the painting done by, of which this is a copy, when the painting done by Titian was commissioned by Philip II of Spain to hang in the Escorial, I was 49 years old.
Titian was a very famous painter. You all will
He
know
was a
that.
very famous painter. If you, again, Google Titian, Tiziano del Silo. He was a famous painter and a favorite of Philip II, the King of Spain, and his father, Charles I of Spain, Charles III of